Meantime, the Michigan Civil Rights Commission is holding the first in a series of public hearings in Flint to see if racial bias factored into the decision-making process that led to the water contamination that has now affected some 100,000 residents. This is the White House announced. President Obama will be traveling, of course, to the city next week to hear firsthand from those impacted. Joining me now, Flint's Democratic Representative Dan Kildee. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. It's good to be on.
So we know that the president is coming. A lot of that is because of this letter that he got, of course, from an 8-year-old girl. But the governor has said, telling the Detroit News, and I'm quoting here, "I've got a pretty full schedule next week. There's not currently a day I'm scheduled to be in Flint." Would it help if the governor and the president were able to sit down and talk about this?
Well, I think it certainly says something about the priorities of each, that the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, is coming to Flint because it is facing the greatest crisis that the city has ever faced, and the governor cannot rearrange his schedule to sit down with the president and talk about how the federal and state government might help solve this problem. Look, the president's been working hard on this. I've talked to him about it several times. He's deployed his cabinet. He's coming himself. And so far, what we've seen from the governor of the state of Michigan is a very serious effort to deal with a public relations problem for himself, but really not the kind of response that you would expect from the governor of a state whose state government itself caused the problem. It's a little bit hard to take.
For a lot of people around the country, it's kind of tough to wrap your head around the fact that this is still going on, that people in Flint are still dealing with bottled water every single day. In fact, I just want to play a little bit of sound from Mary Courtney, of course, the little girl who wrote the letter, for how her mom sums up what daily life is like.
It's been hell. It's been frustrating. Every time we come in contact with this water, it gives us rashes, headaches. Having to live on bottled water constantly, it's irritating.
What do you tell people in Flint when they ask, when is this going to be over? When am I going to be able to turn on my faucet?
I mean, the sad thing is that we turn to the state government and we can't get an answer to that question. And while we do have legislation at the federal level that would supply direct and immediate help, we have Republicans in the Senate blocking it. We can't get a commitment from House Republicans to take up Flint relief. It just seems like there's a lot of people pointing at one another saying, well, it's not our fault, we're not going to fix it. You know, the way I think of it, if there's an emergency, the first thing you do is solve the problem. Get the people the help they need, and then we can figure out what the problem is. If your house is on fire, you don't call a city council meeting to debate the cause of the fire and determine whether or not we should pay the firefighters to put out the fire. You go to the house, you deal with the problem. The people in Flint need help, and they need help right now. And there is no good excuse for the state government's response. And frankly, there's no good excuse for those in Congress who continue to block direct relief from the federal government either.
As we mentioned just before we came to you, sir, there are these public hearings happening now to see if racial bias in any way factored into the decision-making process here. What do you expect to come out of these hearings?
Well, I would expect that the finding would be based on what most people in Michigan think of as logical. If this had taken place, this crisis, in a wealthy, more affluent majority community, you would see a much more robust response. That's not to say that it's intentional or explicit bias, but there just is a different way in this country, and certainly in the state of Michigan, that people respond to a crisis that takes place when it's a very poor minority community. It's a sad reality, and it just shows that we have a long way to go in this country.
We'll be watching and listening to more of what comes out of those hearings, and we will continue to follow this story here on MSNBC. We can assure you of that. Representative Dan Kildee, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.